Good evening. Hey, Paul. It's great to have you with us. This
Well,
is Sandy Shellis at Environmental Coffee House, and I am going to put the welcome Paul Beckwith sign up so everybody can see, although it's cutting off your chin. And this is the Be Live app with Facebook, so it doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, and everybody knows that I mess up all the bells and whistles anyway.
well,
So,
I haven't used this particular app before, so I thought it was on my phone already, and it
oh,
wasn't. So I had to load it all up and
no,
stuff.
you
But
did with me 2 years ago.
yeah,
You did. Yep,
well,
yep, yep.
it told me, yeah, I wasn't valid anymore. I had to renew
Oh,
my
you
thing.
weren't valid? Well,
Yes,
that's a horrible thing. How can Paul
so
Beckwith not be valid?
I don't know. Just
Did you get the big noise? Not valid.
no, no, I didn't get that. But
No. Well, welcome everybody. I wanted to start out and say that it's really nice to have Paul. Collectively, we are the kitty parents of 8 furballs. And of course, Shackleton is very famous on your videos, and my guys are not. They're famous on Facebook because I ad nauseum will put pictures of them up. But let's give Shackleton a
yes,
hand. Yay, Shackleton. He's a beautiful cat.
yes, thank
And
you.
how are you feeling?
I'm good. I'm good. Somebody apparently told me that the Shackleton, for people that don't know, is named after Shackleton the explorer, who was a very world famous Antarctic
Yeah.
explorer.
Oh, yeah. I read that
And
book in college.
yes, and Ernest
Ernest.
Shackleton, he brought a cat with him apparently on his expeditions, and somebody suggested that the cat was probably named Beckwith. So,
Oh, really? And
so
that's where you
I
got that.
so
Oh,
I don't
that's
know, but
cool.
anyway, yeah,
That's
cats
cool.
are curious, right? So,
Yeah,
but
they sure
but
are.
but it's not so environmentally friendly to have so many cats, right? But they're kind of people always joke that when the food supply goes down, at least you get a couple of extra meals, right? But
That's pretty
or
gross sounding, but I'm sure that
yeah,
we would probably know how. Uh,
although I
ah,
think maybe they'll get a couple extra meals. I think is more
they might.
accurate, right?
They
So
might. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh, we start out in such an apocalyptic manner, but really, what are you going to do? I mean, our brains do go there at times,
Yes.
as sick as it is, but we have a lot to talk about. I mean, if you're going to get all serious, the first thing what I'll do is, since this is interactive and everybody's excited, we'll say hi to Karen and Jeff and Tommy and Kim and Dolores and Jim's here. Jim and Tanya, you know about his climate every weekend in Pennsylvania. He's out there pounding the pavement. He is
Yeah.
an activist, but he's the only one there. I mean, people don't
Yeah.
join him. And Steve's with us, and Andrew and Torstein, and so this is great. We are going to have a wonderful. Oh, Amy's here too. She's starting right out with a question. She's starting right out with, Paul, do you think we'll see a BOE this year? Now, I wasn't quite going to start out with that, but Paul, can you see that? You can see all the questions, right?
Yeah, I can see the questions.
Okay,
Yeah.
so tonight we
Um,
can do a little,
yeah.
maybe more interactive.
Yeah. So, what do you think, Sandy?
Okay, I know that the 3 meter ice is gone. I know that we are in a lot of trouble, but I'm not a prognosticator. I'm a follower. And I think that we have been in essentially a blue ocean event for a while because the weather has been changing. I mean, watching you and watching what Torstein does and watching what all of the scientists talk about, we're already experiencing it. So it's not going to be
Yes.
one big bang event. Okay, it's a blue ocean event. All right.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that.
No, it's not. It's a process, right? And it's a process that will continue to slow down the jet streams and make them wavier, and we'll have more and more heat events up in the Arctic and so on. And then, yeah, so it could almost be, but I don't know. Like, is it going to happen this year? That's anybody's call. I'm overdue for actually doing a video on the blue ocean event, so I'll commit now to giving my exact opinion once I've done hours and hours of analysis of the latest forums, Nevin's forum, He set up a new chain of discussions on comparing this year to 2012. There's a lot of factors at play. I mean, conditions, right? We're losing over 100,000 square kilometers per
Oh,
day. The one
day.
per day. Over 5 or 6 days. Maybe 700 gone or something. This has continued for a while. And if it does continue to happen, right, you can just make a projection and see, if we don't have the blue ocean event, we're going to have very little ice. It's almost certain that we'll set a new record unless weather patterns switch, in the Arctic. And then, it's what we still have a couple months basically of melt season.
Maybe you can
Um,
help Karen a little bit on that one. She knows what it means, but I think maybe a little clarification on a blue ocean event for her um, in the Arctic.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, basically, um, when the blue ocean event, and by the way, that's it. I came up with that term quite a few years ago. A lot of people didn't like it. They said, it doesn't make sense to call it blue ocean event. I mean, oceans are blue, but for the Arctic. So
Yeah.
I didn't realize it would catch on so much. So I'll have to be more careful when I come up with these sort of sayings because they might catch on. But um, it's yeah, it's a sort of a crapshoot. It's a gamble. I mean, the idea is to put a probability on. Is the probability 100% that it's going to occur? No. For this year, is it 50%? I would say, yeah, it's probably somewhere close to 50%. Is it much higher? Is it much lower? I really need to. My head's been in space the last few days, on asteroids and
Yes.
impacts on Earth and
Yes.
stuff. And I haven't, you can't continuously look at this stuff because it'll drive you crazy. But I mean, some friends do. They continuously, text me and say, okay, we lost so many hundreds of thousand kilometers today, and every single day they follow it.
Overwhelming.
And the people in the forums do that, and I step away from it for a while and then come back to it, and I can think with a clearer mind and have some new ideas on what's going to happen. And I'm overdue to do that, so I will do that, and I'll do a video. Guarantee you a video within the next short while. Certainly within a week or two, maybe I'll go back to my computer tonight and do something. But I'm still kind of stuck on. It's kind of amazing,
Asteroids.
amazing what's happening with asteroids, and it's not
Oh,
really a
yeah.
big switch of ideas. I mean, climate change is, the risk of an event is the probability of it happening time, or the likelihood times the consequences. And abrupt climate change is clearly happening, and the consequences are clearly getting worse and worse. So the risk is getting higher and higher all of the time. But for something like an asteroid impact, the probability is very low at any given time, but the consequences are enormous. I mean, we didn't know this thing was coming, but it's really bizarre. It's really weird because I swear I didn't know anything about this asteroid. There was nothing in the news. There was nothing about it. I did a series of videos, 3 videos on asteroids, simply because I've been reading um, this great book, which I finished, called Fire in the Sky.
Okay.
And Yeah, I've told people in the last few videos that I've actually been reading this, and I would do some videos basically on some of the ideas. I mean, most people don't know a lot about this. They don't know the
No,
risks of
we
things.
never talk about that on Environmental Coffee House. Maybe Jonathan might post an article on it. Jonathan
Yeah,
O, who does
yeah,
scheduling and finds articles, but it's not anything I've ever talked about. And then this morning, what was that? I got a message from you. It was so excited.
yeah, yeah. No, it was.
Oh my
Well,
God.
I'll give you a little bit of history on this. So the Chelyabinsk
Mhm.
meteor rock was 20 meters in diameter, and when that first impacted, I happened to be in my basement looking at some stuff on climate and Twitter, and it came across people were posting videos in Russia on Twitter. And I looked at it. I looked at a number, and it was a major event happening. So I was
Mhm.
posting and commenting, and we were expecting an asteroid from another direction, and we got this one. And at the time, it wasn't clear that they were unrelated events. So I thought maybe
Right.
the asteroid we were expecting was a chunk from a convoy of them, like in Shoemaker Levy.
Oh,
That comet was 9 pieces that then slammed into Jupiter in 1995. So I was very interested. So I started tweeting a lot about it, and a guy, Mark Boslow, who was a manager, and I think it's at Los Alamos, or one of the U.S. government groups that monitors airbursts, they monitor airbursts around the
that's New
world.
Mexico, right?
Yes, to
Yeah.
see if somebody's popping off nuclear weapons and testing or whatever. And their sensors detect the shock waves that travel around the Earth, but Twitter, of course, is much faster than the set time it takes for a shock wave, a sound wave, to travel around the Earth. So he got this information in the middle of the night. He was just about to go to bed, and he read some tweets from me, and he called in his
Jeez.
whole team and said, "We got to work tonight. There's
All
some
from
event going
Twitter.
on." Yeah, it was all from Twitter. So I'm very interested in these things. That was a 20-meter rock. This one that passed us this morning, it was so close. I mean,
Said
it
three
was
Earths,
it
right?
was 6 Earth
6 Earth.
diameters away. It was 19% of the distance between the Earth and the Moon, which in astronomical terms is like it's as good as a hit, really. I mean, it's
Yeah.
so close, and we didn't know about it. And we didn't know about it. It wasn't seen. It came from the sun. When somebody throws a baseball at you and the sun's in your eyes, you can't catch it. You usually miss it. Well, this thing was coming right from the sun towards us,
Wow.
and but the size range is huge. It's
Hmm.
57 meters to 130 meters. They don't know what it was. Now, if it's 130 meters and it hits the Earth going at the 24 and a half kilometers a second, then basically it creates a crater about something like 2.5 kilometers in diameter, which is what's that in miles? It's about
Sizable.
yeah, it's
Here, do you
multiplied
want
by
me to
point
calculate
six.
it?
Yeah, it's about 1.5 miles in diameter,
Yeah.
and it's half a kilometer deep. It's basically bigger than Meteor Crater in Arizona.
Yeah, I've seen that.
It creates a fireball. Every building within 20 kilometers is either either catches fire or is blown over by the airburst, and it creates a magnitude 6 earthquake, and if it landed in the ocean, it creates a tsunami. I mean, this would have been a major earth-changing event. It would have been an event for the history books. A very rare event, and yet everybody will forget about it within a few days because it missed us, right? But
Yeah.
we need to
Yeah.
detect these things beforehand. We need to see them, improve our technologies to know what's out there. Everything of a certain size that can be harmful, and then also look at ways to, if we know about something far enough ahead of time, we can
Yeah.
deflect
It's
it or destroy it
it's
or
a NASA
something.
sending not
Probes.
yeah, probes. They're sending
Yeah,
probes. Well, you sent me everything to read, so I did, and then
yeah,
I
yeah,
saw
yeah.
that course because I knew this was what you were going to be excited
Yeah,
about.
yeah, they're sending probes up to detect more and more of these things. And there's a couple private companies that are hoping to mine asteroids for the minerals and things. And so basically that would Earth from being a closed system to to being more open to utilizing things in space. If we survive long enough for the technology to be
Right.
developed, right? But there is a lot of
Oh
interest
yeah.
these days on space, on putting people back on the moon, on colonizing, maybe going to Mars and things like that. I mean, we got
What
to
do
get
you think?
we got to get the Earth, our home planet, in order, right?
I kind of
Um,
think so, and I mean, I understand the quest to go, but it's creating a lot more pollution. It's a lot. I mean, it's
yes, yes, it
we're
is.
burning fossil fuels to get there. What is
Yeah,
the whole end game? I mean, our end
yeah,
game should be solving the problems if they're even solvable.
yes,
Then shipping off, unless we have that those people that say, well, the elites are going to ship off because they know
yeah,
what's happening and all that crap. And I'm not going to go into that,
yeah,
but it does give one pause, even though it is our
yes.
space program.
Yes, and it's becoming more and more private ventures, right?
Yes.
These type of things, right? I mean, one of the ways that people are like Musk is looking to pay for these things. They're doing it from a sense of adventure, I think, for the most part. But there's also, big bucks involved if they actually get a lot of space tourists and mine asteroids and things like that. I mean, a lot of these things, are ideas, and some, these guys have the money.
What are
It's
we going
just
to mine on the asteroids?
well, there's a lot of iron and nickel,
Hmm.
and there's the whole idea is if we are serious and
Yeah.
actually go out further and further into space, then it's just way too expensive to ship stuff up there from Earth. So we need to, if we mined materials and then built spacecraft out of them, and got water from the craters on the moon, for example, things like that, then we could produce oxygen. We could.
Wow.
Produce all kinds of materials and basically manufacturing things up in the moon type gravity and then send them off into space. And so I think, I mean, the idea that we stopped going to the moon, I mean, that was like an anomaly, right? Of course, it's the 50th anniversary
But
of
why did we never go
landing on the
back?
moon. Well, it was. I think America just wanted to show that it had the technological capability to go and do what it set out to do, go to the moon. And then once it was done, it was like it was done. Okay, what we can gain from keep going back, doesn't.
Right.
Like why go back? We've proven we can do it, and so the moon wasn't so much a goal for expanding human presence in the universe. It was more of a thing. Well, let's just who compete further, the U.S. or Russia, right?
Yeah.
Pretty
I,
much.
I think you're a little pixelated. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I look good for once and you look pixelated.
Do I? Okay. Well,
Yeah.
that's okay. I'll.
Well, I could do this and then maybe it won't be as pixelated.
It's
It's
all the
never going to be perfect.
it's all the
The
plants. It's just
plants,
it's
it's the
it.
asteroid. It's
Yeah.
leaving something in its
No,
wake. It's
no,
screwing our internet up.
it's all the plants, and it's the smoke wafting around. It's kind of just sending the blurring things out a little bit. That's all.
That's okay. We can still see you. We can still see you. All right. So you have, all right, we've covered now the asteroids, which are exciting, but they're scary because we don't really have the technology, I guess, to foretell that one's going to hit us in like an hour, yet. But
Yeah,
obviously, since this happened, maybe they will speed it up a little if they can get the tax money funding,
yeah,
at least
yeah,
in the United States.
yeah. I don't know. I showed a couple of reports. One of them was from June 2018, U.S. report on funding to basically find more these objects and classify them and determine the risks associated with them impacting and things like that, and what could we do if we saw one, say, a year out or 2 years out, because there's a lot of things that we could do. I mean, we have technology, but it just has to be adapted to either deflect or slowly pull it off course, or just break it up into pieces so each piece would then enter the atmosphere. Of course, everybody's seen the movies Armageddon
Yeah.
and Deep Impact and things like that. So so everybody's kind of aware of that these things are out there.
Well, Angela says that it's planning to go back to the moon from a commercial aspect. There'll be private funding, and she heard that on BBC. And so, I mean, is it for the good of all? You
Well,
know,
I think that, I mean, the Chinese are committed to going to the moon. I mean, their target date is 2035 to land people on the moon. The U.S. Target date was 20. Was actually just recently.
$20.35.
Yes, but it's been pushed now to 2024. The idea is that if Trump gets a second term, that he wants it to happen just before the election for after the second term is ending. Right. That's the goal. I was reading this just a few days ago. So the U.S. goal is now 2024 for
2024.
going back to the moon. So we'll see what happens.
It seems it to me, it's not something I am excited about. I'd be much more excited about political change and changing. Now, I could segue a little bit into the Green New Deal with you
Yes.
a little bit.
Yes. Sure.
Okay, so we've gone from asteroids to, well, blue ocean event, asteroids. The reason why I want to talk about the Green New Deal is I want to ask you, because there's been a lot of discussion on YouTube and all about the fact that the Green New Deal, will it foster more growth? Will it be something that will ultimately just keep business as usual. And then there's the wrong kind of green folks, and there's the degrowth movement. I'm wondering where you are on this somewhere. What's your position with all of these different, everybody's push and pull?
Yeah, it's all getting very confusing, right? There's too much information out there. There's too many different viewpoints, and I'd have to basically try to simplify it and say, I'm sticking to my three-legged bar stool. you know, we need to
Okay.
slash fossil fuel emissions, but we can't do that in time. So we need to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere in a big way, and a lot of people are starting to come on board with that, whether it be planting trillions of trees or I mean, that would be one aspect of it. Planting huge numbers of trees to pull CO2 out, but also there's a lot of development, high tech development on carbon dioxide removal and on methane removal and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, or methane destruction. And but this is again, we're losing sea ice, and we need to really look at ways to bring sea ice back. It looks like we're not going to be doing anything at all to prevent the loss of sea ice. It looks like it's going. If it's gone this
The guy
year,
Dave
20.
Dave Borlaug,
Yeah.
the that did that. What do you think of that? And Patrick, because I know Patrick was dying to have me put up that. I sent you a graphic,
Yes,
and
the thickness of the ice is
yeah,
just it's I mean, there's no multi-year ice left, really. I mean, there hasn't been for a few years. The thick ice that was up in the Arctic along the Canadian archipelago was basically first year ice that was pushed mobile and pushed and ridged up against the Canadian archipelago. But then a few years ago, that ice was not ridged enough to stop the ice flowing kind of like between the fingers of like flowing between your fingers, or in other words between the islands in the Canadian archipelago, right? And you could tell the behavior was completely different, because that was the going ice moving through those islands that are fairly close together was not a mechanism of ice loss in the Arctic before. And it became very clear that became a new mechanism of ice loss just a few years ago.
wow.
So yeah, I mean, I would still, the best I could, I'm still saying, I fully expect a blue ocean event by say 2022, the next 3 years, 4 years, and if it could happen this year. And I will give a lot more details on my thinking as I need to really immerse myself in it for a couple of days, everything that's written about it and said about it, and then come up with a opinion. It'll still be an opinion of mine. I mean, I don't know, just get
Right.
everything I can, and
Well,
think
your
it's like
opinion is very learned. You
it's
spend,
like a chess game. Well, that's what I try to
yeah,
do, right? I mean, everybody
of
has
course.
opinions, and I recognize this opinion. Like, I wish I had the ability of Guy McPherson to know for sure that the Earth is going to end in 2026 or in 2024 or in 2020 or whatever the going time is, right? Because I just don't have that confidence like he does, that I
You're
there
completely different people.
I'm
That's
just
that. You're
I'm
completely
just
different people, and that's,
I know, I'm just giving a little bit of a rub. I'm just making a little bit
I
of a joke
know.
that when you have a moving scale like that, people kind of say, oh, what's the latest
Yeah. Or when
you
is
know
it going to happen? When is it going to happen? And you ask me,
right.
and of course I can. I'm not a prognosticator. I just
Yeah.
follow and watch, and I see I see what's happening is again not happening. It's
Yeah.
not a, oh my God, one, naming,
But
Amy
one
says,
thing
ha ha ha,
but
naming the date.
Yeah, but one thing I would
Funny
like to
one, Amy.
point out is that people like Guy and myself that are more, we're definitely interested in the big picture, and we're interested in information from all different places, right?
Right.
Like we're certainly not, we're not like a specialist in
Mm-hmm.
ice,
Mm-hmm.
in a certain glacier. And when you go into science more and more, you become more and more specialized, and you know more and more about less and less. So I heard an interesting thing: the difference between scientists and journalists. Scientists learn more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. Okay, journalists know less and less about more and more until they know nothing about everything. Okay, so there you go. I think I got that right. So, certainly there's been books written about people called so-called super forecasters, right? Some people can actually have a good handle and make a lot of forecasts about geopolitical events and things, and they actually do a fairly good job. They're wrong a lot of the time, but they're right a higher percentage of the time than other people. And the book I'm thinking of is Super Forecasters is one of the books. So people that get information from all kinds of different places and are not
Mm-hmm.
specialists in an area, they
Mm-hmm.
can do far better at forecasting what's going to happen, say with sea ice, than a guy who just studies sea ice day in and day out and does nothing else, because they don't see other things happening. They don't see the big picture. They're too focused on such a narrow
Citizens
specialty.
journalism. I'm going to put something up really quick because Andrew's really, he wants this. Andrew, what is your big question to Paul? I'm looking for it. He said it was, no, the stream didn't crash, Andrew. And he had something about, oh, here it is. I mean, a 10-degree temp rise by 2026 is a bit extreme, but who knows, God forbid. Now, is that what you wanted, Andrew? Oh, well. Oh,
Yeah,
Andrew's got a lot of stuff. Andrew, this is a lot of stuff to put up on the screen. But are you game, Paul?
yeah, sure.
All right, I'm going to put it up really quick. Maybe I'll just read it. Hey, Paul, I have a few questions in regards to the extreme heat wave that occurred in the Midwest. Number one, the dew point sweat bulbs were extremely high throughout the Midwest. You talk about how places like South Asia are facing the critical dew point sweat bulb temperatures of 35 C, but is it possible for the USA to be facing dew points like this? The dew
Uh,
points were dangerously high, 27 and higher where I lived during the heat wave with a heat index of 50. And he goes on. I mean, I'll put it up for a second, but
yeah.
you want to talk to
Um,
that? It's a huge comment.
yeah. Okay. So make sure this will be posted on your site. I can
Yep,
have a look at this later. But basically,
absolutely.
I of course it's possible. And let me give you an example. Okay, we know that the temperatures in the deep south are extremely warm at times in the summer, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and we're also getting more and more tropical storms, more and more hurricanes coming across. So let's talk about Harvey, for example. So Harvey came ashore, down in Texas, and the came in off the Gulf. The Gulf of Mexico is extremely warm temperatures. So when you have all you need basically is for the Gulf of Mexico water temperatures to reach 35 degrees Celsius. Now,
Okay.
they're not that high. Often they're 33, though. 32, I've seen. 33 Celsius. Sorry, it's in Celsius, but
Yes.
um, because the wet bulb is at 35, right?
Mm-hmm.
Celsius. So, that's why I'm talking about it. But you get the point is when the surface water temperatures reach that 35-degree temperature, then there can be enough evaporation that there can be almost 100% humidity over the coastlines at that point. And when that humidity just goes ashore, it can be the temperature will rise even more as you go away from the coastline, but the water vapor is 100% at 35, right? So when the temperature gets to 40, say, it might be 80% humidity. When it gets to 45 Celsius, it might be 70, but you've reached that wet bulb condition. And
Mm-hmm.
that's when it's going to be trouble, and it's going to be an abrupt transition. It's going to be like people are fine, water temperature is 32, 33 Celsius, people are fine. You get hit that 35, then I would expect that there will be lots of casualties
Oh.
along the coastlines when that happens, and then people will say, hey, what's going on, and this will be the cause. We'll have passed that limit.
And you know
Now,
what'll be going on, Paul? All those Elon Musk types will be watching us from their space capsules on the
yes.
moon or an asteroid.
Yes, that's right. Well, you don't. I mean, think about it. Why would Elon Musk send his car up into space, right? Because he wants to use it on the moon or
Because he
something. He will
knows
redirect it.
WASF.
I don't know, but yeah. So the problem is when you reach these really high temperatures, it depends. If there's water bodies, if there's shallow water bodies nearby, then watch out, because as long as there's sources of water vapor combined with those huge temperatures, then you have a real problem. I mean, right now in Europe is having another massive heat wave. I mean,
Yep.
Paris just set temperature records to the last few days, and there's widespread heat and huge problems, and they don't have much air conditioning. So France, only 5% of
No.
the homes have AC. Germany 1%. They just don't have the ability to handle this. So a guy in the UK said, "Oh, it was so it was so hot. He walks into his greenhouse during the heat wave and he just about couldn't breathe." He said, "I understand what wet bulb temperature is because." He waters all the plants in his greenhouse. The water vapor gets captured there,
Yeah.
and can't leave. So I'm just going to put a light on because I'm kind of fading into the
You
darkness.
are. I noticed. I put
Yeah.
you on full screen and yeah, you're getting dark. But you know what? It looked very interesting. But
Yes.
there's Paul. And
So
let there be light so we could how do your
yes.
cats not bother your plants? How do I know this is like very far off the
Yeah.
topic, but how
Yeah.
does that happen?
No, they do bother the plants, but
Oh.
what I have a little squirt gun with each group
Oh.
of plants, and the cats absolutely hate that squirt gun, and
Okay.
you just catch them in the act, and they learn pretty quickly that
Do you hear that, Doug? My husband's watching.
yes.
And
So
Doug, the squirt
yes.
gun, maybe I could have some plants in the
Yeah,
house.
yeah. So just go to Walmart or something and pick up, a bunch of plastic squirt guns, and
Right?
just don't throw them in the ocean to contribute to
No,
the gyre, right?
no. We'll just squirt the cats and Mama can
Yes,
have a few more plants in the house. Like I
yes,
want to
that's
bring
right.
my basil and my herbs in the house, but I know they'll eat them.
Yes, I mean, make sure it's very important too to make sure the litter boxes. There's one on each floor of the house. They're easily accessible and they're cleaned regularly
Oh my
because
God, I am the
because
litter
they
box queen.
no, see, the cats will start thinking outside the box and acting outside the box.
Into the
Right?
plant. Hmm.
Yes, yes, and that's another problem,
I'm a
right? So
veteran
yes,
cat mama.
yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
that's why I only have one plant in the house because I
Well,
really can't deal with that. I
yeah,
can't deal with the cats doing that. So,
yeah.
okay, we digress into some daily type of talk, but really, where were we?
We
We
were
were
talking about the heat
Andrews.
waves
Yes.
in Europe and the wet bulb temperatures, and can we reach those in the U.S.? See, another thing in the U.S. with the remember Harvey? Okay, Harvey kind of parked. It meandered around at a couple miles an hour for about 4 or 5 days, and it dumped up to 5 feet on Texas. So one of the big reasons why it stuck around so much is because the jet streams were very, very slow and they weren't pulling it off as they normally normally a hurricane goes ashore, it loses strength quickly and then it shoots off and dissipates.
Hmm.
But it dumps a lot of rain, but it doesn't stay in the area for long. But Harvey and other storms are starting to linger and sort of sit there, and one of the reasons is I talked about the brown ocean event, or brown ocean, not event, but brown ocean effect.
Right.
So basically, if it's rained a lot in the region where the hurricane comes ashore prior and the ground is all saturated and the hurricane dumps all this rain, that water just sort of sits on the surface. And then as the storm passes, that water sitting on the surface can that kept the strength of the hurricane up will now evaporate in large quantities, greatly increasing the
Oh.
humidity over that region. And it's the
Oh.
deep south, so you get really, really high temperatures, and you get very, very high humidity, and you can reach these wet bulb temperatures that are very bad for human health. And also, people have
Oh.
to be careful in their indoor environment. Like if you work in a kitchen, for example, you're doing all this cooking, you're boiling water and stuff, and there's not enough ventilation, and then there's a heat wave going on. You can make the conditions within that kitchen
Mhm.
almost fatal, right? In terms of
Ugh.
wet bulb temperatures. So
Yeah.
it's very important to be able to measure humidity and measure temperature. Have thermometers around the workplace. If your boss doesn't supply them, just get some really cheap ones and put them all around. And You know, I mean, if it's 100% humidity and 35, you know, you just say, look, I'm going to die in 6 hours. I got to,
Oh my
you know,
gosh.
you need ventilation here in your kitchen or something, right? You have the evidence right there.
My husband comes home and tells me they don't have the air conditioning on where he works, and I feel bad for him when it's. But here, where we are, it's temperate. I mean, we don't go over 90.
Yeah.
It really hasn't. I think once so far this year, and it's not been that bad. We've had tons of rain, and so my sandbags are there, and nothing's
Yeah.
happened. But we
Yeah.
have had so much rain that it was feeling like we're in the Pacific Northwest down here. You're up there in Ottawa. And
Yeah.
then I remember
Yeah.
when you had those floods, I followed you through all the flooded stuff. And that's when
Yeah.
I learned about that. My
Yeah,
gosh.
yeah, like it's yeah, I mean the rain has been phenomenal in the US this year. And of course it's greatly affected the planting, it's greatly affected the you know, the growth and the health of the crops, and you know, yields and things like that are way down. I mean, I did a whole video on the effects on the global food supply. You know, Europe, you know, I mean, the wine, the grapes apparently are withering on the vines right now.
Oh, God.
And you know, I mean, French wine is, you know, world famous, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Well, if that
the
doesn't wake the wealthy people up, I don't know what will.
yeah, yeah.
Losing their
So
wine.
yeah, yeah, and you know, the in the alpine regions, I mean you know, the glaciers are retreating, you know, up in the alpine regions, the French Alps, the Swiss Alps, and stuff, and
Good
you know,
Lord.
ice is binding a lot of the rocks together there, so rock falls are there's a lot more rock falls, and it's a lot more dangerous to do mountain climbing in those regions now than it used to be. Um,
Wow.
so
That's
there's
pretty heavy.
yeah, there's lots of different effects all over.
Everywhere. Now, I've got a question for you. This is completely off of everybody else's topic, but in Environmental Coffee House, there was an article about cloud seeding in Indonesia because they're in drought, and they're going to put up what some kind of salt uh, uh,
Yeah,
mixture. Can you
it's
talk about that a little bit?
yeah, it's usually something like silver iodine seeding, and this has been done by various people over
Mm-hmm.
the years. I
Oh
mean,
yeah,
it was tried quite a bit in the U.S. in the '60s and '70s, I think.
and
You know,
not
I'm not
very
sure when it started
successfully.
off, and it you know, the Chinese used it during the Olympics. Like, they didn't want the rain clouds to make it to the, you know, to rain over the Olympic sites, so they made them rain earlier, before, you know, as the prevailing winds were bringing the water laden clouds towards the Olympic venue. They tried to make it rain. They fired off these silver iodide with these cannons, and you know, people have various successes sort of on a local region with this sort of thing. What it does is basically, you know, the water vapor rises and it gets colder as you go higher, so the
Mm-hmm.
water vapor condenses into smaller droplets, and the droplets can bump into each other and coalesce, or they can grow. They can extract water vapor out of the atmosphere and grow, and they reach a critical site. But in order for those processes to happen, they generally need some aerosols in the air. So if the air was
Ugh.
perfectly clean, you wouldn't get the coalescence into droplets from the water vapor.
Do
You
you
could
like
get
this idea?
super saturated. So you're basically creating aerosol particles. Well, I mean, they're pretty. They're supposed to be non-toxic, non-potent materials that they're using, and you know, but that's what Indonesia is talking about
Right.
doing. And you know, often they have problems because, you know, it gets so like when their precipitation fails and everything dries out so quickly, and then there's these massive fires, and then that creates all of
Mm-hmm.
these you know, you can then get some storm conditions created from these massive fires with the heat, you know, going into strong updrafts and things. But these storms can create a lot of lightning, but often very little rain. Or sometimes when it's so hot, you get rain. It's called virga, I guess. You get rain falling, but the rain evaporates. The droplets evaporate before they hit the ground. So
So why
you have a
bother?
big problem. Yeah, so you have a big problem here, and you
And
know,
then what it does is it gives people the idea that, oh my God, they can control the weather. And you know, just reading an article like that, it goes through like wildfire, and it's like the game of
yes,
operator. You take the article, but then by the end, of
Yes,
whoever's got the other end,
it's
they're
totally
going to
distorted.
it,
Yeah, yeah,
completely,
yeah,
completely. When it's probably a very benign process, it's not even really going to be fruitful,
yeah.
unfortunately.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, I'm glad to hear
Yeah.
you
So,
agree with me there.
yeah. I mean, are they having success with it, or is this
I
just an
don't
idea that
know.
they'll
Well,
start
Jim
deploying it?
just said we found in Pennsylvania that they were cloud seed and a deluge would happen 50 miles east of us. So now that's interesting, Jim. I don't know about that, anything about it. So it if there was cloud seeding in Pennsylvania for drought, when I don't
Yeah.
know, and then it did rain or a deluge.
Yeah. Well,
He
50
said it
miles.
was in the
So,
70s. He said he would see that when he was a
yeah.
kid in the
Yeah,
70s.
yeah, they were doing some heavy cloud seeding then, and a lot of farmers would try it. And what would happen, I guess, is if the deluge happened 50 miles to the east, the prevailing westerly winds moving from west to east would carry those clouds across. So eventually they
Wow.
would rain out. But if they're moving at 20 miles an hour, they're not raining right away. There's a 2.5 hour delay, and it rains 50 miles away. That sort of thing, I guess, was happening because
Oh,
once you seed, you create the droplets, but the droplets has to grow, right? As long as the droplets
he
need
said, yeah.
the aerosols to coalesce on, and then they need to grow through these processes where they take water vapor from the atmosphere to grow the water droplet, or they need to coalesce with each other, so collide with each other and collide and form bigger drops, and eventually when the drops reach a certain size, then their mass to surface area ratio is such that they can actually start falling down as rain, right?
Hmm.
So that what happened. It sounds like the seeding, created lots of small droplets, but the droplets didn't grow fast enough to fall in the region where they were hoping they would fall. It took that time, say a couple hours, 2 3 hours or whatever, for them to grow big enough to actually
Right.
precipitate. But by that time they were 50 miles away,
So
downwind or
perhaps
something.
that's why they gave up the government or the people who
Yeah,
control the agricultural department, which is
right.
what I think that it would have come under their purview,
Yeah, well
gave it up because it wasn't successful.
you could say just start the seeding process 50 miles to the west of you, and you should be fine, right?
Well, they didn't do it.
But then you do need a source of the water vapor, right? Generally that might be a lake or a river or saturated soils or
Yeah,
something. You need a source of the water vapor for sure.
pull it
Yeah,
up. All
yeah,
right. Well, that was interesting. I know, let's see here. Because I'm out of what I wanted to ask, really. And there was something back down. Oh, Patrick, Patrick is there was that question again with the Ohm Tech, but he said Peter Wadhams seemed interested near the end of Dave's video. I wish everybody the best with every kind of invention that could do something, as long as we don't look at the end result, because I don't know if the end result is going to change no matter what we do. But
yeah,
I'm not a nihilist, naysayer, negative nabob. I'm
yeah.
just a person like everybody here, formulating what our thoughts are and trying not to be rigid in our opinions. And because our opinions are formulated by what we learn, and you have to be very discriminating online what your sources are, I find.
Yes, yes, that's certainly true.
So we've been on 43 minutes. We've got some questions from the peanut gallery out there. Keith Boyd, Paul, how real is the trek for sequestration?
How real is the track for sequestration? So for carbon sequestration.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think the most promising things for getting carbon out of the atmosphere is, I mean, I really like the idea of these companies that are talking about planting, 1 trillion trees. So there was a recent study that said, if all of the land that we don't use for growing crops and for urbanization and stuff was actually targeted and was actually used specifically for growing trees as quickly as possible. How many trees could we grow? And I think the numbers they came up with were something like 1.2 trillion trees
Wow.
or something. And then they calculated how much carbon would be captured, and at what rate would it be captured, and it would start making a big ding, in reversing the destruction of carbon sinks, which we've been going gangbusters on, since humans have, been industrializing and stuff. And this study, I would say we could do even far higher than what we can do on land in the ocean by stimulating phytoplankton growth. Now, we have to do it correctly, because you might be aware of the huge Sargasso Sea. This sargassum, it's like a huge algae. It's like a
I
macro
rewatched your
algae.
video today.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not rooted.
No.
It's not like a plant really. It's more like an algae, but a huge algae. And because of nutrients going into the ocean off Africa, this huge mat of sargassum weed spread, across thousands of miles. And does it captures a lot of CO2, but then if it just decays and releases, that if it decays, at the surface, then you get the CO2 produced, right, from aerobic decomposition. And if it starts to sink a bit and use up all the oxygen, decays anaerobically, then it produces methane. So the question is it good in the first place or not, right? And
Hmm.
so you have to, you have to be careful what you do. And if it's in shallow water, if there's a bloom of phytoplankton in shallow water, then that can create dead zone, because when the organic matter sinks to the bottom, all the oxygen is used up, and it creates dead zones where almost nothing but jellyfish can live, right? And so
Yeah.
then you have another problem. So you need to look at look at all of these factors. And I think what the result is that if you could take areas near the equator in the, say, central Pacific or something,
Okay.
where hurricanes are not going to be generated. So you can have these floating platforms and things where you stimulate phytoplankton growth. You have mussels and things growing on platforms and chains, and you can have, sort of rafts sort of hanging off these chains where seaweeds can root and things like that. You can create a whole sort of artificial island type ecosystem. And I think that could suck up enormous amounts of CO2. So I mean, there's lots of other ideas with direct air capture, an actual machine where there's a physical process. You have some fluid which absorbs a lot of CO2. You pass air through from big fans, and it takes CO2 out of the atmosphere. The CO2 is removed. And then when you get enough CO2 captured in this material, in this liquid, then you heat up the liquid and all the CO2 is released, and you capture it in concentrated form. There's companies like Carbon Engineering and many others that are sort of looking at this. Of course, there's the Iceland work where you pump the CO2 deep under the ground, and they found out that it could convert to limestone rock very, very quickly, like far more
Wow.
quickly than we thought it would take decades to centuries, but it turned out within a few years, most of the CO2 that they'd pumped underground had actually been absorbed and formed rock under the ground. I mean,
So what happens if we
yeah.
start pumping large amounts of CO2 into the ground and forming rock? What happens?
What
Can we
happens?
can we fill fault lines?
Well, we need to see there. The thing is people seem to
We're
get
losing
fixed.
your head.
Yeah. People seem to get fixated on saying, okay, this is an idea, and this is the best idea in the world, and I'm just going to pursue this, and kind of ignore all the other ideas out there. And that's especially if it's our idea, right? I mean, we can spend our whole life trying to push our idea,
Yeah.
right? And there's lots of different things. I try to look at the approach where I try to look at everything that's out there, and then try to sort of make an assessment.
Yeah.
This is a really good thing. This is not. I try to promote any and all ideas that
That's why we follow you, so we can
seem to
learn
be
all of the ideas.
seem to be reasonable. I mean, I haven't done carbon dioxide removal or solar radiation management videos too much lately. I mean, there's always lots of topics. There's always too many topics. But I try
For
to sort
one
of
person.
follow what's the most important. What are the key things? right?
Yeah, well, the key things are the mitigating the mitigating processes now. Now, I mean,
Yes.
we should, I don't. I'm not a proponent of sitting and doing nothing. I
No.
mean, of course not. I'm a proponent of doing anything and everything we can, and finding the ways to eventually not even need to use fossil fuels to make the things that energize us, but we cannot continue, I think I say, with the growth paradigm we're on. We can't continue with the cities expanding and all of that. We
Yeah.
really do have to change our whole culture. And that's a big conversation we're having on
Yes,
different channels
yes,
too.
yes, we do. And we have to change our thinking. Don't forget that lots of us grew up, with superheroes like, Superman, and Superman would always come along and save the world at the, when needed. And a lot of people, they seem to think that there'll be some super technology introduced, or there'll be some massive breakthrough, which nobody's thought of yet. One of the arguments for, with population increasing, as global population increases, the number of people, that are really smart would also have to increase, you would think. Although it seems
Yeah.
with CO2 levels going higher and higher, maybe the opposite is happening. Maybe we're evolving to being not so smart, smart devices, dumb people sort of thing. I don't know, but we tend to think that somebody else is going to think of this problem and solve this problem. And if we change that thinking to, well, I have to do stuff myself. I have to, whether it be spread the information to as many people as I can, whether it be to talk to the politicians that I know and say, look, we can't continue with this stupidity, whether it be to get to know lots of people locally, to, say, what will our particular region do if, say, the power grid went off, or, food supplies doubled or tripled, how would we grow everything locally? All those sort of things. And people can realize, once people realize that, yeah, there's no magic bullet, or there's no super woman, not Superman, that can save us.
Right.
We've got to take on the persona of these superheroes as individuals ourselves, and do what we can to, apply our
Right
skills
on.
as best we can to address the problem. But
Right on.
I think if people don't recognize the severity of the problem, then that's how they don't even people don't even realize that these solutions are needed, or that we need to
Well,
do.
no, because they're busy, as I say,
Yeah,
trying to
putting
be on HGTV buying a beach house.
yeah, exactly, or putting food on the table, or
Well, that's the other end of the
having yeah,
continuum.
you know yeah, exactly.
It's called living.
Having multiple jobs just to
Yeah,
to cover expenses and things. Yeah, it's
well,
crazy.
we're looking at that.
Yeah,
Our
yeah,
life is changing.
yeah.
Mike, hi, Mike. Mike says, "How does humanity keep up with the forest fire CO2 output? Alaska, Canada, Russia, and China is blazing." Hi, everyone.
Yes, yeah. I mean, this is a huge issue, of course, because often if you have a massive wildfire that takes out a massive forest, of course, these things have always happened through time from lightning strikes and things. And some people argue that our management programs to prevent forest fires means that the kindling just builds up more and more, and then eventually, when it catches, there's nothing anybody can do to put it out. These sort of, and also, there's lots of new people. There's people that are actually moving and building houses and living right on the borders with massive forests, and they're going to be much more greatly exposed to wildfires and things like that. So, and as after a wildfire burns, if the climate has changed in that particular region, if the precipitation is lower and it's hotter, then you won't necessarily have the forest that you used to have
No.
grow back, right? You'll have, I mean, this is, for example,
No,
one
I
of the
think about
ways.
that a lot too.
Yeah. For example, think of the rainforest, Brazilian rainforest or something, right? If it becomes a lot drier and a lot hotter, then those forests, basically, the climate is not conducive to supporting those forests. So what happens is there's a big fire, they burn down, and then you end up getting grasslands growing with the odd tree, like some savanna type thing, or if it's drier, just grassland. you can look. It's very interesting to look at the sort of history of the progression of a forest, and I mean, this is a field of biogeography. Why do certain plants grow?
Okay.
Why do you look at an environment and see the vegetation that you do in that environment, and how it changes? And one of the best places to see all of the different regimes of vegetation is in an alpine situation, because you don't have to go very far. You just have to go up, and you can see the vegetation changing. Right, you might get forests and meadows and things in the lower elevations. As you get higher and higher, the trees get more stunted. Eventually you reach the tree line, there's no trees at all, there might be shrubs and stuff, and then it's just bare rock and then
Yeah.
ice as you go up. So you can see all of those different bio regimes, if you like, as you go up a
What
mountain.
happens to the wildlife, the animals, and in as that changes over? Are they going to go extinct? Will there
Well,
be
see,
amoebas that come up out of the ground and start all over after
yes.
we've destroyed the environment totally?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, the animals have to, they'll migrate to try to survive. Like, they'll migrate to generally closer towards the poles to try to reach a region that they're more that's suitable for their
Yeah.
survival. And this works okay if you have a lot of north-south corridors. So one of the things with creating protected lands,
Mhm.
right, forest regimes, natural national parks and things like that, is it's really important to connect them in the north-south direction. So you
Yeah.
don't need, if you have isolated pockets of land, you want to be able to, if they're connected in the north-south direction, then it's possible for things to migrate. And if they're not connected at all, or if
North,
they're
south.
connected in the east-west direction, then you're out of luck when the conditions
Right.
change.
That's
Right, you
interesting.
get lots of extinctions and things.
Keith says, whoops, wait a minute. Keith says, they die. Oh, that's the part,
Yes.
that everybody starts getting upset about when, at least on some media, you look at all of the articles about the species extinction and the animals and uh, all of these mitigating fixes we're working on, scientists are working on. Who's working on that? A lot of scientists working on species and keeping them from going extinct, and or will it just be the survival of the fittest and who adapts?
Yeah. Well, there are, I mean, there's lots of biologists in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems is that as there's fewer and fewer. I mean, government. One of the things about government labs is they're supposed to be looking at the overall situation, the overall system, and with the idea of government supposed to protect the public, prevent, keep harm away from the public. But
Oh,
as these labs close down, because we go to more and more privatization and corporatization, then these biologists will be working for companies like Monsanto and companies to try to improve seeds or whatever, just to increase the bottom line. Like, the idea of Terminator seeds is a perfect example, right? I mean, the only possible purpose of seeds which cannot which are good for 1 year, and then they're infertile. They can't propagate.
did you freeze on me? I think you're frozen.
Trained in
Okay.
specifically in biology and ecology, and but if they don't, then our whole system collapses and breaks down. Right.
I heard some of it, but for some reason I lost you. But I don't know if everybody else did. Well, we'll go to Angie. Angie, what I don't understand is that the UK conservation charities weed out non-native trees from woodland, but trees are species which will have the most difficulty migrating. Hmm.
Yes, that's a very good point,
Yeah,
because
Angie.
our terminology is, when we have not native species, right, in a region, and then we get new species coming in from whatever source, and we call them invasive species, and we
Mm-hmm.
treat them like the enemy, and we try to remove them all, and so on. And
That's terrible.
it's I mean, some of these species, wipe out all of the species that are in that region, but one could argue that the movement of these invasive species often is it's basically species migrating, right? Their seeds go everywhere, and they start to take root in areas that have a favorable climate for them to grow in. And this is how biogeography, works, and why we get different regions of biology in the first place. And so here we are, actually. So there's an argument that says, us trying to just destroy all the invasive species that are happening is a what we need to do, put chemicals in the environment to try to destroy these invasive species. And I'll give you
Oh.
an interesting example. I was I was at I was at a cottage recently, and freshwater lake, beautiful, and they have an invasive species which they've just noticed in the last few years, and I think it's called star. It's some algae. It's a macro
Mm-hmm.
algae, and
A
it's in the
macro algae.
So I talked about macro algae being
Mm-hmm.
sargassum.
That's
That,
yeah.
yeah. But this is freshwater macro algae, and it's like a star shaped um, weed, and it grows in mats on the bottom, and you can get like about 6 feet of this weed clumping on the bottom, and it grows so thick that fish can't lay eggs and spawn and stuff. So it can have a big effect, and it's only been spotted in a couple parts of the lake, but it's a species that's native to China. So you sort of wonder, well, how on earth does it get up into a Canadian lake? And is it from people's aquariums and then dumped into the lake
Oh
when they don't
wow.
want the aquarium, or is it flushed down a toilet? Aquariums flush down a toilet, somehow getting into the lake system, or does it come in the ballast of people's recreational boats? They go on one lake, and there's bilge water in their boat, and then they go into another lake, and when the bilge water is emptied, it mixes with the lake they're going into. And there's lots of different ideas for how these things are transported, but they can change the entire ecosystem of lakes fairly quickly. So this can be a problem, but one could argue, well, with climate change, I mean, when you take every climate change, when you think of the climate angle of everything,
Yeah.
it can really let you sort of, you have a deeper understanding of why things are changing so much. And when things don't change, that can be even more surprising than when they do rapidly change.
And they have changed so much. Even the littlest thing like today, I had a gigantic, beautiful butterfly on the flowers that came out, just one big butterfly. And it made me feel so special and so happy just to be able to witness that. But where I live, I have deer every morning and rabbits and a lot of birds and wildlife. So I'm really blessed at this point that I still live in the middle of that, even though
Yes.
there are invasive species and there's bugs eating things in the garden, and probably somebody has to go put eggshells in so slugs don't crawl over. And as
Right.
much as we're very
Yeah.
weedy people, we don't
Yeah.
pick the weeds. I can't pick the weeds, but
Yeah.
but and you're in more in the city in Ottawa, or are you in the
Yeah.
suburbs
Yeah. More in the city,
in the
closer to
city?
downtown. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's where you do a lot of some of your walking
Yeah.
videos.
Yes. Yes.
Do you
That's right.
ever think you want to get out of where you are and maybe live in a rural area, or are you happy in the city?
Well, I do have, one thing in Ottawa is you don't have to go very far to get the rural areas. There's sort of a green belt around the city, which where development is being restricted. Hopefully it stays that way. So, there's a lot of farmland, and
Oh,
the
cool.
government has a place called the Experimental Farm, which covers a large area.
All
So,
right.
developers are always trying to get in on things, but so far, I mean, it's generally quite a green city, and I have access to rural areas.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good.
I mean,
Good.
do
'Cause
you have
I've never been to Ottawa. I mean, we've been to Canada I used to go to Canada all the time. Now I heard they're just terrible at the border with cars and wanting to rip everything apart. And
Yeah, we're building a wall too to keep people.
keep us out.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
my stepdaughter is Canadian, so if we want to go to Canada,
yeah.
we're gonna have we're glum of her.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I expect, as climate change proceeds, that we'll have hordes of American migrants coming up to Canada, from the U.S. Midwest mostly, right? They'll be coming up into
yeah, right.
Manitoba and Saskatchewan
Oh
and
my gosh,
Calgary.
because in the
You
Midwest
know,
they're losing everything and the crops aren't growing and it's really,
yeah,
really
yeah,
serious.
they'll just start unless we build a pipeline to ship water to them, or we convert one of the pipelines carrying natural gas to
We've
send
talked
water.
about that. And
Yes,
of
yes, we
course, the
have.
discussion on that is okay, but how do you do that? The inside of the pipelines are polluted with gas, blah, blah. Oh,
Yeah,
Paul, we could get into so many
yes.
topics.
Well, I think
And
so. The trick of Canada is to convince Trump to put up a wall on the Canadian border. Forget, and that way, if we can encourage him to do that, and
then we're stuck here.
then it can keep the hordes of Americans from coming up when everything hits the fan, right? So
Hordes of
there you
Americans.
go.
Let me tell you something.
Yes,
I'm not going anywhere. I will sit on my weedy property with my
yes,
rabbits and deer until whatever happens. And if I can't breathe, I'll say, sayonara, I've had a good life. I'm pretty disabled as it is. So thinking about moving somewhere,
yes,
Paul,
yes.
is a very eco anxiety producing thing for me.
So how's your relationship with ticks?
Oh my God, I can't believe you brought that up. I called my primary today and asked if I could get tested for ticks because I have to go through this paperwork I have, and if I'm moving around a lot, it's because I'm starting to get to that point where I can't sit anymore. But uh, so far, we haven't been bitten. Interesting, though. I asked him if I could get a tick test, and she says, "Well, have you been bitten?" I said, "Well, I really don't know. I live rurally, though, and I found these tests that I took in 2012 that came positive on the Western blot, but then I went to this other guy, and I thought, well, why not? Somebody else we know." And interestingly enough,
Yeah.
I have fibromyalgia and he has fibromyalgia. And he said he's been going to this tick support group. And people are saying that it's Lyme disease, not tick support group.
Tick support group.
Yeah, we're going to the
Let's
tick
We
support group.
support all the ticks. I was going to say,
No,
what do you do? Do you bring ticks and you all squish them or something during
no,
the
we
meeting
compare
to
how
feel?
much blood each one has in it.
Yes.
No, it
Yeah.
actually Lyme disease support groups. But I haven't heard much. If my husband's still with us, which I doubt because he was at work, he could probably fill us in more. He's the outdoors person,
Right.
and but that was the thought that maybe all this fibromyalgia diagnosis is
Yeah.
really
Maybe
from
it's something like
Lyme
that.
disease or
Yeah,
ticks.
I do have a book which I bought. It was a few months ago now on ticks and Lyme disease. The whole book is on that, written by some medical people, and I will have to look at that and do a video on that because it's very pertinent. It's very relevant. I mean, I was wondering if all that water and that you've had record rainfall this year. I wonder if all that water is actually does that bring more ticks about or does that bring fewer ticks about? I'm not really too sure on how the tick
Well, let's think
population
about it.
varies.
I don't know either, but
I'm
I've been seeing these. They're very pretty when you photograph them very close up. The little beetles on
Yes,
but they've been in the garden, so I have to think about how to avoid them now. And
not ladybugs. You're talking about
no, no, no,
no.
no, they have a
You're
greenish tinge. There's
yes, a
uh
greenish black,
huh,
and they're quite large. Some of them can be quite large. I
yeah.
think.
But as
Yeah.
far as ticks, okay, one tick was in our house. Somebody brought a dog in
Yes.
named Hambone. And Sancho Panza had a tick on him, and that tick went boop, boop, boop. And I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I have 5 cats, and I'm not going to get ticks because Sancho Panza
Yeah.
has ticks. So,
Yeah.
and if Hambone
That.
watches this, he's probably going to scream at me, but
Yeah.
about it. But
So
I
what you
haven't
took?
heard.
So you took his dog out back and let it go, or where's?
No, no, Sancho
Yeah,
had a lot of problems this year,
yeah,
but no,
yeah,
he deticked his dog, but
yeah.
but that means that the dog picked the tick up running around my property. So
Yes,
I
right.
really don't know. And my husband, we were talking about this just today. I can't believe you brought it up.
I just have a visitor. I just want to turn the camera, and of course, this was. You can see
Hi,
him.
baby. Yes, of course we can see him. I'm going to
Yes.
put him on the big screen so everybody can see.
Yeah,
Hey,
he's
yeah, he's
he's
famous
actually
cat.
yeah, he's sleeping a lot more these days. It's just too hot for him.
Aw, he's
But
a
anyway,
famous kitty. But we
often
can, you know what? He's the perfect end to a really nice discussion.
yes,
He's the perfect end. Look at him. He's so cute. See, now my cats, I'm not going to get anybody, and I don't let them in here when I sit here because I don't want them jumping all over everything and trying to I know
yes.
my cats, and most of them won't come in, but there's one that's really a pain. Maybe one time I'll bring one of my kitty cats,
Yeah, yeah.
but
No, this guy, I don't know. Their hearing is so good. Like you move around, like he knows where to find me. Like he if I come into the room and I'm about to film a video, usually he comes in and he wants to partake, right? But
he
lately, I
loves
say
you.
he's just been sleeping so much. So yeah,
Yeah,
just
he's hot. He's hot. Well,
yeah, he's a bit
I've
frisky
really
here.
I've enjoyed this, and everybody's saying
there,
this was great. Oh, Buddy says he has lots
he,
of ticks in West Virginia.
he's really hamming it up for
Ooh.
the camera today, isn't he?
Yeah, he is a little bit, but he's a little bit low. We can't see him as much as we'd
Oh, is
like
that
to.
right?
There
Oh,
you
okay.
go.
There
Hi,
we
kitty.
go.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
got my
he's
5 of them out there.
yeah. Anyway, yeah, he's performing well here.
He's
So
performing well.
maybe I should I should do scheduling of my video filming based on, when the cat is like this, right?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. He's a little actor. He makes
Yes.
us all look at you've got Shackleton and Hambone's got Sancho Panza, and I haven't picked one. I would say if I picked one of mine that was going to be a star, it would be Dottie, because this cat is the smallest, but she
Yes.
rules the roost. And
Yes.
she is just the boss of bosses. Animals are amazing.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
they
that they
are.
are just
I,
amazing. And we are animals, and we're all on the same plane.
yes, and often we forget about that
We
fact,
do
right?
forget about it. Yep,
Yes.
we do. Well, listen, Paul, it's been over an hour, and I've really enjoyed this. I hope we do it again and not wait 2 years,
Yes.
because who the
Yes.
hell knows where we'll be in 2 years?
Yeah,
I
exactly.
don't know.
Yeah, so let's not leave it so long. Let's do one in a few months or something.
It will. It sounds really good to me.
Okay.
Anybody, you want to have a last parting comment? Up, Mike says, thanks for doing the show and have a good evening. All
Yeah.
right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. And I will talk to you soon, Paul.
Okay.
Everybody, good night. Wait, I got to try to get my peace sign in.
Yeah. Goodbye.
Night. Peace.